The way mathematics is taught before college needs to change. The system is still predicated on the idea that although having a knowledge of science, especially mathematics, is important, not all students will have to have a strong background. I, however, believe this is a backwards view. In modern society, the ability to understand scientific concepts and communicate mathematically is no longer something limited to a few scientists and engineers that have a strong background in science and engineering, but rather is an essential skill. The fundamental idea that every student leaving high school has an ability to communicate with others has been accepted for years in the traditional sense, with 4 years of English required in most American high schools. The ability to communicate mathematically and scientifically, however, has been neglected. Students, by the time they reach college, should have a fundamental grasp on concepts, especially those up to calculus, and be ready to use those tools and be able to communicate with others mathematically. The scientific communication language requirement, if you will, certainly is not limited to mathematics, but also applies to programming, an area of communication that has been neglected in about all American high schools. In a technologically advanced world, no longer is it enough to be able to effectively communicate with other people, which I certainly agree is one of the most important outcomes of an education. The ability to communicate with machines is growing ever more important as computers become household tools and are interacted with on a daily basis. In order to illustrate how far we've come scientifically, and more, or perhaps less, in an attempt to illustrate my point, I'm going to begin by talking about the pinnacle of science and engineering, CERN's Large Hadron Collider. The collider's purpose is to explore the very origins of matter in the universe, attempting to find the elusive Higgs boson and uniting the Standard Model. I'm not going to talk about the physics that the Large Hadron Collider is attempting to explore. I wouldn't be able even to begin to explain the subject in a better way than Brian Cox does in his TED Talk. Rather, I'm going to scratch the surface of the engineering required to construct and run the Large Hadron Collider and related experiments. These feats of engineering have taken 10,000 engineers from 40 countries 15 years to build. The Large Hadron Collider itself consumes 120 megawatts of electrical energy. The product of these efforts of thousands of engineers can be seen not only in the great speed with which the collider's particles are accelerated, at nearly speed of light, perhaps more clearly, this is about 11,245 laps per second around the 27-kilometer tunnel. But it can also be seen in the 15 petabytes of data that will be generated each year. The main general purpose detector is named Atlas. Atlas weighs 7,000 tons and is 12 stories tall. If you compare this is roughly the same size as the towers. Wallace and Wilson, if you know them, here on campus, which are also about 12 stories tall. The Large Hadron Collider has a number of experiments set up to utilize its capabilities, including ALICE, TOTEM, LHCb, and of course ATLAS. ATLAS is the collider's most general purpose detector and has 4 main subsystems. The inner detector uses an array of semiconductor pixels to detect the momentum of the particles as they scatter after collision. The colorimeter measures the energies carried by the particles, and then finally a spectrometer identifies and measures muons. Muons can be thought of as heavy electrons. It uses toroidal magnets to bend the particles and then measure their momentum. The detector was brought into the LHC, which sits 100 meters underground in pieces and more or less assembled by hand over several years. Just as a picture can express 1,000 words, a mathematical equation can just as elegantly present ideas and easily take 1,000 words or more, even volumes, to explain in English alone. In order to explain the public certain topics, they need to have some basic level of knowledge of mathematics, and the current expectations really don't cut it. In today's world, the expectations have risen so dramatically, the educational community hasn't changed with the needs of society. If programming and mathematics were taught as a means of communicating ideas and for communicating to machines at a much earlier age, the fields of science and technology would open to a far greater number of students. The world is changing with the exponential rise in technology today, and I only hope that the nation's educational system can keep up and that someday speaking about and communicating mathematical and scientific concepts will come as naturally as the spoken language. An idea that is certainly not impossible and will occur sometime in the future.